去年 Hive Ventures 首次发布的台湾企业 AI 趋势白皮书，获得了很多国际媒体的转载，也让大家看到了台湾在 AI 领域的深厚潜力。那么经过1年，台湾企业在 AI 又有什么最新的发展呢？接下来我们就要请燕再次上台来跟我们分享今年最新的2022年的白皮书，欢迎燕。
各位长官、各位先进、各位前辈、朋友，大家好。那我又回来了。接下来呢，为了我们全球在转播当中的这个观众们，请容我用英文为大家揭开今年台湾企业 AI 的这份趋势报告。Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure today to present to you the 2022 State of Taiwan Enterprise AI Report. The Enterprise AI Report is a project we started last year to try to unveil the mysteries surrounding AI adoption in Taiwan. While AI has been a raging buzzword globally over the past few years, its adoption has been relatively nascent. And while many have tried to take that bold leap, only very few have successfully crossed that chasm of disillusionment. So in our second ever edition this year, we continue to help businesses, decision makers, and solutions providers understand where everyone is in this adoption cycle and share trends with the industry at large. At Hive Ventures, we are believers and first movers in this space. We have dedicated our past careers over the past decade, as well as our future upon this space. And we continue to believe that this is where we will lay the foundations of the future economies for decades to come. And that is also why we've embarked on this journey on this nationwide survey to continue to understand and study the dynamics of the market in hopes of identifying opportunities that exist in these markets. And we're very glad to have partners like the AI Academy of Taiwan, the ASVDA, the National Development Council, and many others today that have helped us make this report possible. The online survey, we conducted this survey over about a month between January and February this year, and we collected results from a range of different industries, from manufacturing to semiconductor to banking, finance, and healthcare, amongst many others. And these also come from a range of different sizes of companies. We have about 50% of these companies representing our small, medium businesses, and the other half represents our large conglomerates that are very representative of their economic structure in Taiwan. Now, we then classified these responses into different company maturity levels based on the respective weighted average scores of the component category, from data readiness, team readiness, operational readiness, and to help us derive the final enterprise maturity score and level. So what exactly is the enterprise AI maturity cycle? This is a model that we created to understand how businesses think, decide, experiment, and implement AI technologies within the enterprise. So from level 0, where companies are just starting to be aware of AI technologies and its potential benefits, but have yet to take any action, to level 1, where they're establishing the data infrastructure upon which future AI applications will be built upon. Then level 2, where the basic infrastructure has been kind of completed, then businesses move on to build business cases and POCs, or proof of concepts, to start experimenting with these use cases. And at level 3, these companies have probably improved an investment into the R&D development and buying the tools and solutions, or identifying partners to work with together on this initiative. Then level 4, where AI is operationalized. More models are being built, more and more are being deployed, and they're starting to see the starting value, the initial value from a business value from within the organization. And level 5 is where these models and values start to proliferate across various different business units within the organization. It usually starts from one core business unit and starts expanding laterally across a wider area in an organization. And finally, to level 6, where AI essentially is part of daily operations, and it's already within the enterprise DNA. So while there's much to discuss in the report, let me just walk everyone through the key salient highlights of the report this year and some of the trends that we see. Overall, what we do see is that there is a huge improvement of the entire ecosystem this year. As you can see on the chart on the right, these bars represent the distribution of all the companies that we've surveyed across the entire enterprise maturity cycle. So what we see is that on the blue bars, those represent 2021, and the pink bar represents this year's report. We've seen an entire systematic shift towards the right side, which is higher maturity levels across the board. And especially, you'll realize that in last year's survey, about 50% of all respondents are within the level 0 to 2, the baby steps of AI adoption. And now this year, 50% of them, to be exact, 48.7% of them are already in the level 4 and 6, the growth stages. We see the largest change between the level 3 and the level 4 companies. One other interesting point to note is that in last year's survey, no companies actually made the level 6 category. But this year, we have 4 companies that moved on into this category where AI is part of the enterprise DNA and they're beginning to see democratization. These 4 companies come from the high-tech manufacturing, banking, finance, and healthcare sectors. So this acceleration and adoption, we think a big part of that was spurred on by the fact that the pandemic finally hit Taiwan last year. As you may all know, Taiwan was actually relatively shielded from the early onslaught of the entire global pandemic. But last year in May, we started to have our first taste of local transmissions and heightened alert across Taiwan. Now, most of us have been able to escape unscathed, and probably have done relatively well in this aspect, but many businesses have suffered in this process. And their global counterparts have actually experienced that pain earlier on in the pandemic. Now, while this taste of pandemic has really spurred many respondents to feel that the company has actually sped up or increased their demand for AI in response to the uncertainty of the pandemic and the market. Now, 58% of respondents have actually that sense of urgency already, whereas there are still 42% that are they've already engaged in AI adoption even before the pandemic, and so you don't experience any net new kind of urgency, or they're still sitting on the fence and slow to respond to all of that. Sorry. Globally, we're also seeing that many companies have shifted their urgency. I think acceleration across global companies in Taiwan, I think that's a common theme, but in the rest of the world, we're seeing that many of them actually have changed their focus instead of just accelerating, shifted their focus into building business resilience and deriving market insights from adopting AI. But if we shift that focus to Taiwan, though, we see that most businesses are still favoring revenue-generating functions and in production itself. And in another part of our research this year, we also see that a lot of that key concern and objective is towards increasing efficiency or even cost reductions in the production lines. I think it's not surprising. After all, Taiwan has been able to build enterprise success in our history based on our ability to manage costs and to control spending, especially through hard times. Now, we saw that manufacturing adoption as a business unit has surpassed last year's leaders of sales and marketing and become the #1 focus for most of our respondents this year. But I think the core focus is still in cost control. Now, while we forecasted last year that this trend should start evolving towards from the front end business units, the revenue generation ones, towards the rearward back office operations or warehousing and logistics, we expected that trend to happen this year. Well, the trend hasn't been very evident yet, whereas actually we focus even more on the front end. But what we did see is that more and more business units are adopting it, which shows what we call the proliferation. So according to last year's report, there were on average 1.66 business units adopting AI and its applications within the organization, but this year we're coming close to 2. Now, we expect this trend to continue, obviously, but we hope that enterprises, companies can actually take this opportunity today to really leap forward and accelerate and see more proliferation across the entire industry. Now, one other trend that we do see also is the commoditization of AI technologies and its applications. I think we've mentioned earlier that Taiwan is a very results-oriented culture, and as a result, I think a lot of the core technologies that we're adopting actually come from end applications that leverage on these technologies. So for example, in manufacturing, automated optical inspection, AOI, or robotics process automation, RPA, leverage on different levels of computer vision, vision AI, and that has allowed many industries in Taiwan to actually adopt this. So vision AI is popularly adopted within production lines to detect yield and or defects in manufacturing, from glassware to printed circuit boards to laptops and mobile phones. And it has already become a very popular and common practice, but we're seeing more and more R&D going into these fields to increase the performance, greater consistency, and higher statistical accuracy as compared to what humans are capable of. And on the other hand, the abundance of marketing technology and chatbot companies in Taiwan has escalated the adoption of natural language processing and understanding, or NLP, NLU technologies, into the hands of enterprises today. So many of them leverage on these services to automate social media engagements across Facebook, Instagram, Line, and to really leverage on these technologies to understand the sentiments of their users, customer satisfactions, and whatnot. So that has actually brought NLP and NLU to be one of the most popularly adopted technologies in Taiwan today too. Now, another trend that we think is really optimistic that will continue to support this kind of commoditization of technologies is the willingness for our enterprises to start adopting open source. Now, even our largest and most conservative industries and conglomerates are now taking that, embracing this technology, embracing open source and bringing these into their internal development, as opposed to just leveraging on traditional bespoke systems. And I think that has empowered a new level of flexibility and access to latest technologies for these enterprises. It has been also very encouraging to see that not only many more companies are adopting AI and uplifting the entire ecosystem, it is also encouraging to see that many of them have actually taken the bold leap to operationalize it, to really bring it into daily operations across and developing more and more models. So last year, we've reported that Taiwan's model deployment rates, so we call, that were actually higher than the global average of 20%. What 20% means is that globally, out of 5 models that are developed within an enterprise, 1 of them is being deployed into active production. But in Taiwan, this number actually increased even further this year. So we're seeing out of 4 models developed in Taiwan, at least 2 to 3 models are actually in live production. Now, this is a really high number and much higher than the global average, but I think the efficiency, again, partially driven by a very results-oriented culture. So we develop what we know we will use, but also it's driven by the platforms that have been built to allow this level of scaling within the company. And not only are we developing more, we are developing a lot faster. So compared to the previous year too, survey companies have on average improved 50% in terms of their model deployment speeds. So last year, 38% of the companies were able to deploy models in less than a month. This year is 38%, last year was 25%. And if we narrow this down, there are now twice as many companies who are already able to deploy models in less than 7 days. I think the popularization of the concept of machine learning operations, ML ops, its processes and the platforms itself have really expedited this change to greater speed. Last but not least, we see very, very aggressive and ambitious plans in many enterprises going forward. These companies intend to develop and deploy a lot more and a lot faster in this year going forward. Most companies surveyed across all different types of experience levels and maturity. They've planned to develop as many models this year as they did in the history of them adopting AI or building models. So that means that within this year alone, we're expecting to see at least a double in the number of models being developed. And if we hold up the same kind of model deployment rates and speeds, that's actually twice the amount of models in production that we may actually see. And for some of the most AI-savvy companies in our research this year, we see that they expect to develop and deploy at least 50 models and above. We think these numbers are actually a little overly aggressive in our opinion, but if these companies actually do hold the model deployment rates and the speeds and keep up, then it might just have a good chance of happening. And it will be exciting to see what pans out the rest of this year. So while we are very excited for these ambitious plans, we actually share a lot of the concerns that our respondents had this year regarding the challenges of deploying AI and scaling it within their organization. We believe that the fundamental fabric for AI deployment needs to be in place within an organization in order for these ambitious plans to actually succeed. Now, the data infrastructure, the operational processes, and the team capabilities, the platforms for scaling, these must be in place in order to ensure that your scaling doesn't hit the bottlenecks. And if worse, it might actually create system-wide breakdowns. We see that out of all these respondents, including the ones who are very aggressive in their plans this year, over 61% are still wrangling with what we call early stage problems, including data collection, talent supply, or they're still fine tuning their business cases and objectives, right? So if these problems are not solved, we'll hit the scaling bottlenecks that we mentioned on a massive scale. So it is important to sort out these teething issues to ensure that there's adequate data, operational, and team readiness before embarking on these aggressive plans going forward. Finally, organizations, we feel that you need more than just technical infrastructure in place. You need the people, the policies and processes and platforms in place, and to really devise these policies and processes to keep the entire systems in check. A lot of respondents this year have concerns over performance monitoring, performance of data scientists, and the reliability of their models. And having these problems are essentially the largest or greatest hurdles that they have to cross in order to really scale their operations. And having these policies in place, we believe can help the team and management build greater confidence towards the reliability and the accuracy of their systems. We also believe that greater liberty to empower the people, the enterprise users, is key to really generate greater scale. But we also believe that in order for that to happen, counterintuitive as it sounds, we believe that greater liberty can only be achieved with greater governance. So more platforms and policies need to be in place on data and model monitoring to build and foster that faith in management and the development teams to empower users within an organization at all levels with more data, more flexibility to really enhance quality decision-making at each level. And the ending result will be greater productivity across all levels of the organizations and all facets. Greater governance and monitoring, it will also enable greater flexibility and scope for the AI teams to further develop. We hope that this report has shed light across industries on where each company is within on the journey of AI adoption. But knowing where you are is really just the first step. How far you can go going forward is the challenge that we pose to all our audience today and the enterprises across the world. Through our Galaxy Summit today, you will hear from industry experts, thought leaders, and experienced practitioners share their latest insights and experiences at each stage of this AI maturity cycle. From establishing your networking and data infrastructure to building out the AI applications in manufacturing, banking, finance, and semiconductor, to scaling that operation across the organization, as well as liberating your organization through AI and democratization. Of course, you will also hear about how blockchain and Web3 may redefine how your organization works and conducts businesses in the future and beyond. We hope you enjoyed our report this year, and we look forward to seeing you next year. Thank you.
好，谢谢燕。